Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar hosted by BCS, the Chartered Institute for IT. We'll be looking at a topic that is critical for the country's economic and social future, the digital skills shortage. And in this session, we're focusing on Wales. My name is Claire Penketh and I'm the Senior Policy and Public Affairs Manager at BCS, and I'm delighted to host this important conversation. We want to bring together thought leaders from government, academia, and industry to shine a light on the challenges and, crucially, the opportunities we face. If you have any questions for those of you watching online, do put them in the chat and we'll try to answer them. I'm pleased today to be joined by two brilliant speakers who are uniquely placed to offer their insights on this subject. Professor Tom Crick, MBE, a BCS Chartered Fellow, and Kanishka Narayan, MP for the Vale of Glamorgan. First, turning to you, Tom, can you introduce yourself and the various hats that you wear?
Thanks, Claire. Great to be on the panel. It's always keen to support the work of the BCS. So my name is Tom Crick. I'm a professor of digital policy at Swansea University. I guess probably most substantially, I'm Chief Scientific Advisor for the Department for Culture, Media and Sport in the UK government. Very, very broad work across sort of digital skills. I guess like digital is an underpinning or cross-cutting aspect of lots of my research and policy work. And I've used to be a vice president of the BCS from 2017 to 2020, and I've led all of the major science and technology curriculum reform in Wales over the past 10 plus years. So yeah, really looking forward to the conversation. Thank you very much.
Kanishka, your turn.
Thank you, Claire. It's great to be part of the conversation with you and Tom, and always great to be part of a conversation with BCS. By background, I'm the Member of Parliament for the Vale of Glamorgan. I'm a Parliamentary Private Secretary at the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, and by background was a technology investor working with startups across Europe and the United States over the last few years. So I have a particular interest in making sure that we position Wales right at the frontier of computer science, artificial intelligence, and technology.
Let's just start by looking at some interesting analysis from BCS of the 2022 Employer Skills Survey report for Wales from figures from the ONS. Our analysis found employees in Wales were more likely than all other nations to lack digital skills. So this is in 2022. So it's 40% compared to 31% in England, 35% in Northern Ireland, and 38% in Scotland. This was mainly due to a higher proportion of the workforce in Wales lacking computer literacy or basic IT skills, 31% versus 21%, 27% and 29% respectively. So what's the current situation in Wales now as far as the digital skills are concerned? Firstly, turning to Kanishka. The Vale of Glamorgan, like many areas of South Wales, was formerly dominated by the coal industry. So what's the digital skills literacy and the jobs like in your area now that you represent?
You're totally right, Claire, about the history of the Vale of Glamorgan, which is that Barry is the largest town in the Vale, and in 1913 it was the largest coal exporting port in the world. Has this very proud heritage of having been the source of power and energy for the world and certainly for the UK. And over a long period of time, we've transitioned away. So the core employers now are varied rather than singular, and the composition includes a range of manufacturing sites, factories. So we have Dow chemicals plant in the Vale of Glamorgan. We have Aston Martin making cars in the Vale of Glamorgan. We have a small but growing defense technology sector. We have some startup software businesses at Tramshed Tech. And then we have Cardiff Airport as well, which has both the core airport functions, but also some nascent functions around it in terms of both maintenance of aircraft, but also sustainable aviation fuel research. And so what is most interesting about a place like the Vale is that when we think about skills, and in particular your comment on the statistics around basic computer science and IT awareness, we have two simultaneous things happening. One, the need to move the economy of the Vale and people with us so that we are able to transition from the sectors of the past to the sectors of the future. And basic digital skills are a fundamental part of that. But two, at the same time, we can't just do that first step. We've got to chase the future and chase it really in the context of advanced manufacturing, of high quality engineering, and of what are going to be jobs in artificial intelligence as well. And so that dual challenge is what we've been focused on. We've started to make progress on the first of those in particular. But for me, the aspiration is not only to make sure that we pull all of us into this context of basic literacy, but that we're much more ambitious still in putting people right at the frontier as well.
But just also turning to computing education. So thank you for that swift little link there. So another analysis we did, we looked at 2021 figures for Wales, which showed that it's an area associated with the highest incidence of education training provision, which is quite an interesting and optimistic statistic. 42% of IT industry workers in Wales stating they had received education training during the previous 3 months, and that compares very favourably with the other devolved nations. So turning to Professor Crick, that's a promising figure, isn't it, from a few years ago, admittedly. What's the situation like now as far as computing education is concerned in Wales?
Yeah, thanks, Claire. I mean, I echo the kind of sentiment. I mean, I think it is a very positive picture. There's still sort of upwards trajectory. There's still very, very clear ambitions. I mean, I think it's there's also the nature of how this sits across kind of devolved policy areas for Welsh government, and also the levers for UK government to sort of shape and influence some of this stuff, particularly around kind of government missions, but also, as I'm sure we're going to talk about, things like the AI Opportunities Action Plan and the industrial strategy sectors. And I think, like Kanishka's already sort of implicitly referred to that around, we can still sometimes have perhaps a slightly reductive kind of traditional view of the IT industry, and view that as a sort of traditional vertical kind of IT and telecom sector. But it's very easy to forget about how it is a cross-cutting and enabling. It cuts across essentially every economic sector and every kind of key priority area for Wales. So you think about the demand for kind of IT and digital skills more broadly, and it cuts across kind of manufacturing or advanced manufacturing. It cuts across health and social care. It cuts across, energy, kind of, energy net zero kind of work that's going on in Wales. That all has real strong digital technology, engineering, and things like AI, sort of intelligent, integrated transport systems, all this type of stuff. So the potential there is really, really clear. That also kind of reflects the skills demand. I think there's some really impressive work that's been done over the past 10 years around sort of curriculum or education and system level reform that's been happening around sort of STEM education qualifications and skills more broadly. And I think it's then the connectedness between compulsory education through to sort of parity of esteem and options for post-compulsory educational routes. So the importance of FE and HE and apprenticeships, and not being viewed as, I know I work for a university, but actually I guess I don't want that the gold standard to only be GCSE A levels and university degrees. I think there is a plurality, and there's real strong options for post-16 routes into sort of diverse careers. And I think actually Wales has been leading that with a real vibrant FE sector. And I think FE and HE working together really well on a sort of a regional basis to address some of those education and skills demands for some of those key priority areas as well. So, but I think what Wales is we've seen lots of sort of education system level reform or curriculum reform across all 4 nations of the UK. I think we are, all 4 nations are experiencing similar challenges about the recruitment and retention of skilled teachers. I guess being able to think about what it means for a broad and balanced curriculum, but also recognizing some of the economic demands. But I think we're really clear about the sort of social and cultural and heritage imperatives of what does it mean to be educated in Wales, as well as preparing citizens of the future. So I think kind of bringing all that together, there's some really impressive work being done in Wales, and I guess now it's sort of continued rolled out of the new curriculum for Wales, and essentially the opportunities, sort of diverse opportunities for people across the entirety of Wales.
Just turning back to Kanishka, we were just talking before we started this webinar about some examples that you've got of where digital skills are being really encouraged in your particular area. Can you tell me about those?
Yeah, I think a couple of things that are on my mind. I as part of a campaign called All Hands on Tech that I launched at Cardiff and Bell College in Barry, I went to see what the college is doing at the moment, and it's very impressive, because what they are doing is starting students off at in a context which is very high engagement. People come in, the students had Raspberry Pis, they had bits of kind of Lego brick-driven robots, and they were able to create things in a relatively short space of time, get very engaged in it. And the idea was you start people off there, drive them into a context of engagement where someone might not have walked through the door thinking, hey, I want to be a computer science person. But through that very high engagement piece at the very outset, you then get them through the door. And then once you do that, the college has been spending a lot of time with employers in the area. And my hope is to drive a ton more employers their way as well, so that they can work very closely at figuring out how we can move kids from that initial point of engagement through to things that are going to be long-term jobs of the future. And I think that is really critical, because in all of this, the thing that I'm most focused on is to learn from our history. I mentioned that Barry was the largest coal exporting port, but it was the largest coal exporting port in 1913. That was the year that British coal exports peaked. So in some ways, it was the worst year to have been the largest coal exporting port in Britain, because the economics changed very quickly. And what I want to make sure is that, especially in computer science and IT and digital skills more broadly, as technology is shifting, as the significance of programming is shifting in light of artificial intelligence, that we're chasing the future rather than doing what would have been the right thing to do 5 and 10 years ago. So that's been a really fundamental piece of it. But the broad lesson that I think has been very clear so far is that what the college is doing, what's happening in lots of pockets across the Vale of Glamorgan, is that we're trying collectively to find the highest engagement, highest value sources of adoption in the first place, get people through the door with what makes sense for them in their day-to-day lives, and then help grow them into whatever ends up being the most valuable economic thing for us to do as a community.
So you mentioned AI then. AI is very much the buzzword. And again, we were just talking before we came on air about what are AI skills. Everyone's saying we all need to be skilled up with AI. Are we talking about the users? Are we talking about developers? Are we talking about the teachers? Are we talking about the pupils? So I'll just go to Professor Tom Crick initially about how you see AI in schools. Sorry to put you on the spot there, but I thought it would be a good thing to look at. How do we integrate the skills that we need to learn about and use AI effectively in schools?
No, happy to talk about this. And I mean, it links back to some of the work that we've been doing. Even it feels vaguely prescient with some of the work that I co-chaired the review of the ICT curriculum for the Welsh Government back in 2013, which started sort of some of our curriculum reform journey around, I guess, sort of STEM education. And we didn't explicitly mention AI, but I think some of the underlying principles or the ambitions for equipping, sort of providing agency, empowerment, or sort of autonomy for young people to be able to make considered and evidence-based decisions, and not just be sort of creators as well as consumers of technology. I think that's even clearer now with sort of pervasive and ubiquitous AI tools and technologies. It's kind of interesting when we talk about how would you define AI. I think unfortunately AI is becoming an increasingly sort of unhelpful term, because it's sort of applied to everything and anything, and you can essentially can use it to describe any tool or any piece of software that has that is vaguely data driven and has some algorithms sort of churning away on it. So I think we probably need to be a bit more precise in our language, but I suppose in the same way that we have spoken about having digitally competent young people, we want to, or society at large, you're talking about having sort of media literate, you're data literate. I think there's some interesting criticality about the phrase AI literate, because I think we want to make sure that I suppose the agenda is not being set solely by technology companies. We want to make sure that they are intrinsically citizen-centered, and they are things are being developed and applied. When we talk about things like digital public services, and they are for broader societal and citizens and community benefit. And we know it is quite hard for people to make. It's hard to opt out of some of these things. It's hard to have a real plurality of choice when lots of the mainstream technologies are largely owned by some of the kind of a small number of largely US technology companies. But I think you want people to better understand them at some level. It doesn't mean everyone has to be a computer scientist, or everyone has to understand the nature of algorithms and computational complexity, and has to understand the intricacies of machine learning and the sort of cutting edge sort of techniques. But I think they need to understand what algorithms plus data means, and also what that means, I guess, for them and for their data, and how this stuff can be used for their personal and wider societal benefit. I think in schools this has been addressed in some form, and is continued to be addressed with some of the work around digital competence in the new curriculum for Wales has parity as a statutory cross-curricular skill alongside literacy and numeracy. So there is more prominence for, I guess, digital competence compared to other parts of the UK. I think some of this is being looked at in England with the curriculum and assessment review. But I suppose we also need to have the sort of confident and capable teachers to be able to sort of talk about this and to embed this across the entire curriculum. This isn't just a computer science problem. AI is a pervasive and ubiquitous technology, and it can be used in loads of different contexts. So it's just as applicable for history as it is for, sort of for computer science and STEM subjects. So I think, we are in a strong position. I think we just need to continue the public debate and discourse about this sort of stuff. So the more we talk about these tools and technologies is a really positive thing. And there is specificity for the Welsh context when we think about from a bilingual perspective, certainly for accessing digital public services. But I think there are massive opportunities when we think about, Kanishka's mentioned some fantastic examples in the Vale, and we think about some of the superb work with Cardiff and Vale College. They're a real pioneer with some of this work. Similar, Gower College, Swansea, and Oxford in Swansea. Just like, how do we think about kind of connecting up all the different parts of the system for bigger impact and benefit?
So how can the government and industry work closer together in order to achieve that? And by the government, I mean the devolved nation and also the UK government as well. I mean, so what levers can be pulled to make sure that there is more collaboration to make this actually work? So that's the question to, I think, Kanishka, you want to come in on that?
Sure. I think there are a series of priorities that we've set out from a kind of UK and English government point of view, I guess, in some parts on the AI Opportunities Action Plan, most of which really are focused on understanding, highlighting, and quantifying the size of the AI skills gap, to say that there's this big gap between the trajectory of what we will likely need and the trajectory of what we will likely get on the current path. We need to quantify, understand that, and then fill that gap. There's a second component that we've been focused on, which is to say that we want to make sure not only we have the right amount of skills, but that we have the right range and diversity of people who are able to participate in the economy of the future. And in that regard, in particular, noting that I think only 22% of women make up jobs in AI and data science in the UK at the moment, and in Wales in particular, one of the things I'm passionate about is making sure that from a social mobility and class point of view, we're able to get a far wider range of participation. So that's another area of focus, and I think the challenge there is for government to make sure that it's playing a role in quantifying, holding companies accountable, but also making sure that when we're having the initial conversations, one of the things we're trying to do is match 500 kids in the Vale of Glamorgan with internships and technology broadly construed, finding the thing that most helps a series of people who haven't historically taken part in this part of the economy, bring them in and grow them into it. I think that's a really clear convening function government can play. There's a long-term conversation about non-higher education paths. Tom was absolutely right in talking about thinking about parity of quality of education in both the university context, but also the non-university context. And so in both the non-HE context, but also in lifelong learning, there's a fundamental thing that I think we need to think about in government about the balance of how we're thinking about funding, regulatory contexts, such that, if you're somewhere later in your life and you're working in a context that is not currently very tech forward, but you want to be able to transition to something and both learn on the job and move into a better job as a result of it, the government is able to support it. So there's a bunch of stuff looking across the life cycle, but at the heart of it, I think, is the sense that Tom highlighted, which is that at a constituency level, what I'm really trying to do in my campaign on technology jobs is to say that this only works if we have a bunch of employers, the educational partners in this context, both HE and non-HE, some other accelerator partners as well. So we have Tramshed Tech, and then we have the community in particular having a shaping role from the very early stages. And we can do that at a constituency level. I think we'll be in a much better place in trying to then say what the lessons are in terms of funding flexibility, in terms of regulatory flexibility and everything else that will drive long-term impact.
So turning to both of you, and one of the issues, we had a report out of BCS looking at apprenticeships. And one of the points that we focused on was the difficulty or the confusion that many SMEs found when it came to employing apprentices themselves, and they just found it a bit bewildering. So as far as like the sort of the ecosystem, if you like, the smaller companies, the SMEs in the Vale of Glamorgan, how could they be helped to get more apprentices coming through? Which is a question for both of you, and also just to look at the importance of apprenticeship, because so often it's seen as like the sort of, a degree is better than an apprenticeship, even though you can get a degree with an apprenticeship. So I'd like to look at those two questions with you. Who would like to go first? Kanishka?
I'm happy to just jump in very briefly there, because I think there has been some, obviously we have a different apprenticeship system in Wales as we do in England. And I think that's sometimes is problematic when you've got larger employers with perhaps a UK footprint. So what does that look like around accessing sort of apprenticeship schemes that might be fit for purpose for particular businesses? I think, but then there's also the counterpoint is that the opportunity to be quite agile in Wales, because you can move fast and you can recognise the specificity of challenge and opportunity. And I think the Welsh Government has been pretty clear with this in the past around the prioritising particular apprenticeship schemes for particular domains. So certainly things like advanced manufacturing or software engineering, kind of data science, cybersecurity, like these have been sort of priority mechanisms. I think there are still similar issues for SMEs to tap into, not just apprenticeships, but historically things like ESF funding, just sort of broader workforce development, and also just ensuring there's an understanding of what would you expect a graduate to be able to do? What would you expect a skilled, a young person coming from a relevant FE course or like a higher apprenticeship scheme sort of coming into to enter the workplace? And I think having led a lot of the kind of curriculum and qualifications reform in Wales over the past 10 years, I still think there is a challenging disconnect between, and perhaps a false dichotomy between, an educational path versus a technical vocational path. I think they are way less sort of separate and distinct than they ever used to be, and actually sometimes it's unhelpful to distinguish those. So tell me about vocational education that doesn't have strong kind of academic underpinnings, and vice versa. And I think particularly when we talk about that disconnect and the opportunity for thinking about the parity of esteem and the plurality of post-16 technical education, or the parity of esteem between sort of post-16 educational routes, like using the vehicle of the new curriculum for Wales and new qualifications regime is a massive opportunity. I guess sometimes I've always been a bit frustrated as if the panacea for all problems, let's create a GCSE and AI or that type of intervention that won't solve stuff. I think there's always been a real opportunity for Wales, and I think Kanishka's outlined some great examples in his constituency around how schools, FE, HE, and industry can work together to address this in a real place-based context. So it addresses the challenge and the opportunity at a local, regional, and then fits into a national picture. I think that's always been a real opportunity. As always, it'd be probably great to have more funding and more levers to pull. But I think there's real strength, and it sits across strengths, post-industrial economic strengths in Wales. So it is around creative industries, it is around advanced manufacturing, it is around engineering and technical domains, it is around public sector and health and social care. Like, what's the opportunity for thinking around the Digital Health and Care Wales employs hundreds of informaticians, or basically computer scientists doing stuff for the NHS system in Wales. The visibility of some of those roles is not very well known. So actually, there are real high quality digital data and technology jobs in the broader public sector in Wales, and we just need to kind of showcase some of this stuff as well.
What I love about Wales is just looking at the health trusts, digital skills in health, is that you can get all of the trusts in one room together to have a chat and talk about what digital skills are needed and how they can actually improve that. I'm just looking at the webinar chat. There's a couple of questions that have come in. One from Michael here says, I wonder if it would be accurate to say that Barry was a hub for the service industries, international logistics and management for the coal industry, while Swansea was a hub for the copper industry. Neither were only mining communities. Could this history be leveraged for a future in IT? I'll go to Kanishka for that one.
Thanks, Claire, and thanks for the question, Michael. I definitely think there are aspects of our heritage and history that fundamentally relate to where we can go next. It is true that in addition to being a great port effectively for the export of coal, you had a bunch of ancillary stuff around it, services, logistics, management that related to that. And there's some great people who have deep experience in that context, and we can bring that on into the future. Some of those kind of services and management contexts around shipping and exporting end up being a bit more specific to shipping and exporting coal rather than to, say, becoming a data center based infrastructure economy that then powers on a bunch of connectivity and compute from modern AI. But there are some other skills that we also have a deep history in. Barry's actually got a very large incidence of self-employed people who are engineers and technical in some regard. We've got lots of people who've been working as tradesmen, for example. When we're thinking about future data center technicians, for example, or renewables energy projects that we're hoping to develop in Aberthaw and around there, there is a large opportunity there for us to be able to support people who are already very talented into jobs that are somewhat adjacent to where they currently are, but very materially move them on in terms of wage possibility and progression possibility as well. So the way I think about it, there are 2 or 3 very clear categories. It is true that generally speaking, transport logistics, so shipping, the fact that the airport is in the constituency, those 2 things mean that in both shipping and in aviation, I think we have great possibilities for where we can go as an economy locally. And then secondly, in sort of technical roles that are close to trades, I feel like there's a very, very clear ladder from where people might be today to where I think we can support them in terms of wage and progression if we start with their current skills and are able to provide a very clear pathway as well.
Just thinking about the transition to the green economy, what role can that play, and how can we get the skills in Wales that will be needed in order to help that transition?
I mean, happy to jump in. I mean, there's a huge opportunity. I mean, I guess the country is blessed with natural resources in lots of sort of varied forms. And you think about the future demand on grid. We talk about kind of renewables. We talk about the technology underpinning sort of net zero ambitions. Then Wales could easily be a powerhouse for some of this stuff. And obviously, that links back to broader kind of grid connectivity. It talks about I guess the broader public acceptability for some of these technologies and where they are situated in the UK, and also what's the kind of the local and national benefit. So, if you're going to have big solar farms or onshore wind, like what does that kind of mean for the people where it's close to? But I think that means that demands an ecosystem and a supply chain and a vibrant, sort of diverse economy that's around those emergent industries. And I think other examples that I've already mentioned around like health tech, creative industries, but certainly kind of net zero tech. I mean, I think there's a huge potential there. Without referring to kind of research strength at Swansea University, but actually like there's massive UKRI kind of strategic research capability based at Swansea University that sort of cuts across net zero, sustainable homes, that kind of stuff. But also you're going to be leveraging other embedded tools and technologies or as part of the kind of R&I ecosystem when you've got things like the compound semiconductor catapult based in Southeast Wales. So, there's huge amounts of things to leverage here. And that requires not just, I guess, across sort of the technology readiness levels, you need fundamental research to underpin some of these long-term innovations, but also you need to have the ability to exploit new products and technologies, and you need sort of a combination of bigger embedded companies, sort of anchor companies, as well as a real vibrant supply chain and SME ecosystem. I think Wales has that, and Kanishka's already mentioned some examples. I think there's also the potential to jump on and think about what that looks like over the next kind of 5, 10, 15 years. And I think things like the industrial strategy sector plans will be a good vehicle for this. So what does that look like when you think about view that in a place-based context, the opportunity for Wales? And again, there are aspects of the AI Opportunities Action Plan, and we think about essentially critical national infrastructure. When you think about data and compute, so data centres, and what does that mean for Wales as well, and the sort of broader spillover effects from having that in Wales.
So I have to confess, my mother was Welsh, and I'm very fond of Wales.
That's not a confession. That's something you should freely admit to. That's no problem at all.
But I've noticed over the many years that I've been going to Wales, just how much it's changing. I mean, just one example was going to Swansea recently and seeing all those offshore windmills. It just kind of blew my mind, actually. But if I think back to what it used to be like when I used to go to the valleys, and now you're looking at a very vibrant scene that there seems to be there. Am I correct, or are we just visiting and looking at things through rose-tinted glasses?
You are totally correct, Claire. We are moving into the future. We're moving in a way that is both rich in our heritage, but also really ambitious about our future. If you come to Barry, I remember going to Barry as a kid. I grew up in Cardiff, and I had no idea that in just a couple of decades' time, the western part of Barry would have a tech accelerator, which is hosting a bunch of startups from everything to do with virtual reality, creative advertising, software as a service businesses, a whole range of businesses set up in the western part of Barry. You have a great facility at Aston Martin doing very high quality engineering down the road as well. And a lot of those things build on the starting heritage. We have a huge history of creative content creation in Barry as well. And now we've just moved that into a new world of technological innovation as well. So one of the things I find most fulfilling about Wales is that we have an amazing history in terms of stories, creative content coming out of Wales. We have an amazing natural landscape, and using some of these assets that are fundamental to Welsh identity and applying technology to those feels to me the kind of most sustainable way of driving economic potential for us in a way that many more people than I think elsewhere can take a part in.
Another question in the chat here. This is from Steph Westbrook. She says, I think we are aware of AI and its importance. What's the leading reasons or themes why people are still reluctant to use it? And who should be responsible for driving its uptake? So who would like to go for that?
I'm happy to jump in first. Can I just quickly echo what Kanishka said right at the end? I mean, I think having lived and worked in Wales for over 15 years, I think, and maybe more so now with my kind of UK government role, I think we're sometimes not great at bigging ourselves up. So that kind of the opportunity, the sort of the USP for Wales, and you can kind of carve that up at the I guess the sort of regional level in Wales, but actually kind of the pitch for Wales has always been very strong. And I think there's some really interesting opportunities sort of going forward, but sometimes we maybe, collectively aren't able to kind of articulate that as well as we'd like to, or, it feels a bit like sort of marketing and PR and pitch. So, that I think there's something around recognizing your strengths and really kind of hammering those home, particularly now when there's massive, emerging opportunities around the industrial strategy and AI opportunities, and I guess through the lens of UK government missions. But clearly that aligns to Welsh Government's programme for government and their ambitions and what that looks like kind of heading into an election for the Senedd in 2026. So I guess I think these are sort of things I'd like to sort of a bit more visible in sort of public debate and discourse when we are moving into an election period in Wales, because you want to be able to articulate, well, what's the economic opportunities, but also what does that mean kind of socially and culturally. But I'll kind of leave that there and pick up Steph's question. I mean, I think I own AI for a government department, so I'm sort of senior responsible owner for AI for DCMS. This is sort of broadly my background as a computer scientist, as sort of a researcher and academic in sort of, I guess, sort of a computational social science and how that affects sort of people and citizens and communities and sort of culturally and economically, but also from a technical perspective. I think I understand there are people who are, very, very rapid technology adopters, and they are so keen to embrace and enjoy the benefits of some of these AI tools and technologies. I also understand that there perhaps is sometimes a sort of bimodal distribution. There are people who are quite rightly more considered and perhaps a bit more critical about what this means. I think that's why, we're seeing conversations about regulation and legislation. The UK clearly wants to be pro-innovation in this space, but there's also, there's nothing wrong with being a bit more considered and critical about the potential downside effects of some of these tools and technologies. So that is around, algorithmic governance and transparency, how this sits with personal data, automated decision making, what that means from a sort of data protection perspective. And these things are reconcilable. The data bill is wending its way through Parliament today. That's I think it's in the Commons. There's a reading today, so it'll be kind of interesting about the opportunities, but actually making sure there are the ethical, legal, kind of professional safeguards in place to make sure that UK citizens and UK interests are protected as well. So I think maybe there needs to be that sort of public debate and discourse. I think you need technology leaders to talk about this much more. I think we also need to see how this affects and impacts upon civic society a lot more. So I guess diverse voices in this space is really, really important to make sure that, when you think about how this might impact and disadvantage certain demographies or sort of communities, I think we just need to be a bit more honest and open about that. But just having that open and transparent discussion and debate is a really positive thing. And it's not going to be solved and done and we'll never speak about it again. I think we know this landscape will continue to shift and emerge when we see the continued development of specific tools and technologies. And I think we just have to keep talking about this sort of stuff.
If you think about those hard to reach areas where digital skills could possibly be transformational, what do you think are the levers that government, UK government, Welsh government, industry and educationers can pull in order to actually make this happen? Because we've been talking a lot about the problem of digital skills is how do we bridge it? What can we actually do? I'd like to sort of think about the industrial strategy, for instance. So should I talk to Kanishka about that?
Sounds good, Claire. And why don't I say a very brief word about Steph's prior question as well, because it's really, really critical, AI adoption. Very briefly, I think on the second part of it, who's responsible for the uptake of AI? I think there's clearly a focus for businesses or individuals so that they can improve themselves in terms of productivity and economic outcomes. But I genuinely think there's a very strong government role, because if the big thing for us in government is to drive economic growth after a really horrific period of not having it, and if it's central to our ability to raise revenue for public services, AI is going to be a really big part of what drives productivity growth. And so that's why it's the central mission for this government as well. And that's why we're focused on it. The evidence is very clear that productivity only comes if we all adopt AI quicker than other places and quicker than we otherwise would. It took 4 decades for electricity to be adopted fully. It took 3 decades for steam, and it took about 3 decades for general ICT and computers to be adopted from the initial point of invention through to widespread adoption. If we can somehow shorten that period of adoption below 3 decades and as quickly as possible, I think we'll be in a better place from a productivity point of view. And for that reason, there's a genuine public interest in driving uptake. And I think the 2 barriers that I'd flag, one is that there is a genuine sense of uncertainty about even today kind of legislative compliance from applying AI, because people aren't able to look under the black box of models. They're not sure if they apply, for example, in a HR context, if they're falling foul of equalities legislation. They're not sure in some contexts of privacy legislation as well. So there's lack of trust and certainty about implementation from a legislative compliance point of view. And then the second thing that people often point out is that beyond software development, marketing, and the CEO's office, the economic return on investment is still a bit uncertain, because you can get some sort of high engagement stuff, but driving actual economic value has been tough. There are lots of things we're trying to do about both of those things that we can return to at another point. Your question is really, really at the heart of what I'm passionate about in the Vale, because we have a great frontier set of people, businesses in parts of the Vale of Glamorgan, but we also have a lot of the harder to reach parts of the community and business sector, which we want to try and support in driving technological innovation and adoption as well. And my broad thing there that I'm trying to focus on is that one of the toughest things that's been persistent over a long period of time is that it's actually very hard for our core institutions to engage those parts of the community in the first place. It is very, very hard if you go to some pockets of Barry to say to someone who is currently has a high persistent unauthorized absence context from school, it's very hard to turn up to that child and say, hey, I want you to kind of take up computer science. The kids, there's a very large spike in absences from school. In that context, you can't have a computer science conversation. What you can do is try to find institutions or individuals who are able to engage with those people, get them into a context where you can then blend what is both engaging and ultimately impactful from a technology point of view. To give you a very concrete example of a very small scheme, I've been partnering with a great person for Barry, Lee Selby, world boxing champion. Lee is now working with me and the Welsh policing context to for us to refer those who've had some interactions with the policing system from an antisocial behavior point of view. We try and bring them in. Lee teaches them boxing. They, as a result, are attending a lot more than they otherwise would. And then we move them on to mentoring conversations with people who work in a range of different employers as well, some of them very technology-driven employers. And that thing of saying, how can we reach people where they are, start the conversation there, and then try to move the conversation more broadly long term. I think that's the focus. And then from an industrial strategy point of view, I guess I'd sort of scale that thought at a sectoral level, which is to say that when we're thinking about industrial strategy, we have a core set of 8 sectors that we're very focused on. And now what we're trying to do is also think of some horizontal functional sectors. So one thing that's close to my heart is the chemical sector. We have a great site at Dow in Barry. And what we're trying to say is that whenever you're thinking about these sectors, understand the assets you have today in terms of both physical sites, skills, people, educational institutions. Start with where that is today and find the most effective way of moving that into the context you're going into. So how can we move the chemical sector, for example, from providing silicones for lower value plastics replacements to actually then being part of a semiconductor cluster that exists in the Newport area, so that Dow and Barry can then power the AI innovations happening in South Wales and globally, rather than kind of serving the demand of the past. And so that's the fundamental thing, I think, understanding where your community is today, understanding where the opportunity is in the future, and being able to build a bridge between those two things, either through industrial strategy globally and nationally, or through being able to do some deep work locally. That's kind of how I'm thinking about it.
Another question in the chat here from Meros Munir. How can AI be used to address disparities in educational experiences, ensuring equal learning opportunity and personalised support for students with diverse needs and backgrounds, both on and offline? That's one for you, Tom.
Thank you very much. I mean, I think definitely pick some of the points I said before. I mean, I think there is huge potential for adding AI will not replace teachers, but AI will probably replace teachers who don't use AI. And I think that, is that a truism? It's probably interesting to think about what that looks like when we talk about kind of confidence and capability, and what that means as part of the arsenal, or the intrinsic kind of knowledge, experience, and skills of people who are experts in pedagogy for their discipline and subject. I mean, I think it certainly comes back to the point around how is this learner centered? How does this support individual learners? When you talk about some of the kind of challenges faced by learners with additional learning needs, or have specific learning sort of need requirements, and ensuring that it was fair and equitable, and being very honest, I don't think shouldn't. We don't want to view our schools or the education system as a test bed that only supports companies trying out new tools and technology. So there has to be for the benefit of learners, and it has to be for the benefit of the system, and there has to be some real clear benefits for teachers and schools and everyone involved. So as long as these are kind of key principles for us to use sort of ethical, critical, kind of uses of technology in school, I think that's perfectly reasonable. And I suppose some of that will require appropriate sort of safeguards in place that will probably, what that looks like from a sort of a regulatory and legislative perspective down the line. But I think it probably links back to some of our previous conversations around, there's probably other things that we can do around sort of education sort of policy and system level reform, in Wales as part of other parts of the UK, around recognising that this stuff is important. So, when when I chaired, the review of the ICT curriculum back in 2013, it was quite bizarre that we were having to justify why this stuff was important to teach to children, as if there's, are we not doing young people a disservice by they're not again at the level of technology education or computer science education in schools, and that's not just because computer scientists are moaning about their subject. That's to say this is a necessary and sufficient condition for people just to be citizens of our world. So I think that sort of continues going forwards around, we are having some quite philosophical, existential discussions in education and certainly in university about the longer term impact of AI, particularly for assessment. So what does that look like? But that's not to say that, when learners leave the education system and they go and enter the workforce, they are expected to be AI enabled and ready to use and deploy some of these tools and technologies. So I think there's a real, again, that's that broader conversation around what's the role of these AI tools and technologies. How much control do we have over them? Are they being forced on people? So when you join a job, does it feel like AI is being done to you, or are you able to more effectively kind of have control about how AI has an impact on your role and what you do as a job? But I think there is, long-winded answer. I think there is massive opportunity, and some of that is probably not about AI per se. That is about having better data. So there are other kind of, there's some great work going on in Wales already when we talk about things like secondary and administrative kind of linked data sets for broader benefit and impact. There's also, we're talking about long-term investments by UK research councils for things like ADR UK, Health Data Research UK, and there's specific work that's going on in Wales. And again, I'd talk about Swansea, like the Sale Data Bank at Swansea, but there's also broader work and ambitions around the National Data Library and how can we have more effective use of kind of public data for public benefit. So actually, this isn't just about connecting up a loads of disparate databases across government. This is about sort of saying doing that in a really ethical, considered, and citizen-centered way. So that, I guess the data bit is key and critical, because actually AI is completely useless and meaningless unless you have high quality data to optimize and tune it with.
I suppose it's all at the end of the day about building trust, isn't it? And there's a lot of distrust. And only with ethical guidelines and ethical use will that actually change. I just want to be slightly controversial here. Just looking at, say, the steel industry and digital skills, how can the workers that were working in the steel industry, how could they benefit, for instance, from retraining in digital skills? Is it possible? How easy would it be to do? So who wants to go for that one?
I'm happy to jump in and happy to hand over to Kanishka. I mean, I think there's been some, there's obviously been significant interventions by both Welsh and UK government for addressing the what it means for the closure of the steelworks at Port Talbot, at Tata Steel. I mean, I think sort of the broader sort of Swansea Bay region, so certainly kind of or the Neath Port Talbot and that kind of broader area. I know that FE and HE has been heavily involved in some of the sort of skills and retraining work, and that sits with Neath Port Talbot College, Swansea University, Gower College Swansea, and there's a sort of coalition of people who are supporting this work around some of the interventions. I mean, I think it links back to I mean, there's already some extensive digital and engineering kind of capability because of the precision steel and the type of output that they had at Port Talbot, and actually what that meant for supply chains and SMEs kind of as part of that ecosystem. I think there's probably some sort of portability for that skill set for other industries and sectors. But actually, more broadly, it's like, well, what's the opportunity around some extremely competent people going into other jobs that would rapidly consume those skill sets? So, I think it probably really resonates and hammers home the point we said before around you have these, probably traditional vertical sectors, but again, it's that cross-cutting. Where do we see the sort of partly interdisciplinary, but it's actually the new and emergent sectors that that sits with some of the opportunity for Wales. And I think that they exist, but again, they need some support. And I think the industrial strategy sector plan is a good example of that. As Kanishka said, there are what's those kind of cross-cutting enabling bits. And this, without a doubt, this is a real challenge for those communities, having worked there in Swansea for a long time. But I do think there are significant opportunities for how that competence and expertise and capability can be distributed to other sectors.
Kanishka, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, my brief overarching comment on this would be that first, we should be very sensitive to people who are in a context where they're having to change their jobs. In many cases, jobs they've had for a very, very long time, and in many of those cases, technology will not be the direct answer to their next job and future opportunity. And we're trying very hard, as Tom mentioned, across Welsh and UK government to support in every possible way people who are looking for it to secure the best possible retraining opportunity and then support in what comes next. The second thing to say, alongside saying that technology is not going to be the shiny bright answer for many people, and we're trying to be very sensitive to where people are coming from in supporting them to where they might go. The second thing to say is that actually in so many contexts, and steel is one of them, but in so many contexts, manufacturing and industrial work and factory-based work is radically different to what we might have in our mind. It is already actually a very technology-driven context in many of those cases, all the way through from thinking about the use of precision manufacturing techniques in some aspects, through to even deploying sensors and thinking about computer-driven machinery, much more than the kind of machinery we had even a couple of decades ago. And so one of the things I consistently get surprised by, even if you go and visit farms in the Vale of Glamorgan, for example, you will find a very high degree of use of robots and automation in milking. And so in many ways, this cross-cutting curriculum development we have with digital in Wales is actually a much broader thing, which is that across many of the contexts that we see, and steel is one of them, there is already a pretty significant degree of technology deployment in many of those areas. And as a consequence, we have this really rich set of skills that people in the community have that can then be deployed in a number of other advanced manufacturing type contexts, which can be really, really productive. And so for us, the immediate focus is on supporting people into roles that match their supply of skills and experiences, but the long-term political priority is also to support bringing amazing demand, i.e. great employers in advanced manufacturing and adjacent skills, adjacent sectors to South Wales and along the corridor, because ultimately we want to be able to make sure that when people are moving on from the roles they've had, they're able to move on to very high quality employment opportunities.
So we're coming up now to, we've got 8 minutes left. In these last 8 minutes or so, I just want to look at, there's a question in here again from Steph Westbrook, so I want to answer that one. And then I just want to wrap up with, how optimistic are you that the digital skills gap in Wales can be bridged? And what would be your main advice for how to do that? Or the other way around of those two questions. So we'll just go back to Steph Westbrook, and her question is, for the past 2.5 years, she's been actively engaged with AI, observing that misinformation often fosters apprehension amongst the public. As an academic researcher and computer science educator, she recognises the disparity about how female voices are acknowledged within the field compared to their male counterparts. Given this reality, what measures are currently in place to bridge this gap and ensure equitable representation and support? She doesn't mean engaging girls in education, because I don't feel this is the right resolution.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to pick this up. I suppose things like media regulation sits within the DCMS portfolio. And I mean, I think I've done a lot of work over the past kind of 12 months, and certainly with the Government Office for Science in the run-up to the election last year, around the potential, the kind of the challenges of misinformation, disinformation, and what this means as a broader sort of societal challenge around media literacy. But I guess, as Steph alluded to there, sort of the diversity and plurality of voice. And that's a real challenge when you think around what does it mean for, it's quite intersectional in the sense of marginalized communities and, communities that aren't able to have a voice. So I think that's an ongoing challenge. I think some of this is in part addressed by the new powers for Ofcom in the Online Safety Act, and what does that look like? I think there's also, that can sort of, again, it's the openness and visibility and transparency of some of this stuff, where you look at some of the Ofcom statistics around, they do like an annual State of the Nation report, which says that 16 to 21-year-olds primary source of news is YouTube and TikTok. So when we talk about sort of media plurality or kind of media discussions, that's a really challenging thing. So when you talk about like kind of mainstream media, there's also the issue around, a significant number of people think that their Facebook or whatever their social media platform of choice feed is broadcast, so everyone's seeing that, so they don't see that being algorithmically generated and curated from their interactions and behaviors on these platforms. So again, there is a broader sort of, that's not like a deficit model kind of response, but instead of, I think people need to better understand how these things work to better understand what they're seeing when we think about this from a misinformation. But there's also kind of challenges around disinformation, so it's like very specific to targeted stuff around, from a public health perspective, around vaccine hesitancy, and also just in the sense of people trying to mobilize sentiment about things like immigration and other sort of broader sort of perceived societal challenges, and that sort of stokes sort of broader unhappiness and actually has a broader impact. So I think the idea that the digital world doesn't have an impact on the real world or the kind of physical world is a fallacy. And I think there is definitely a broader media literacy thing that we have to continue to address through a variety of mechanisms. I think just on the point about sort of marginal, I mean, I think I really recognize this as an academic, where particularly in probably sort of traditional or sort of domains in which they are perhaps have been and continue to be male dominated, like computer science or engineering, then actually the visibility of female researchers or female leaders in this space, I think it requires a lot of like allyship and I guess people to call that out much more explicitly. But I think that is also unfortunately kind of systemic problem within academia. But I think there is way more understanding and visibility of this, and understanding of how do you ensure recognition of contribution. But I think that requires everyone to call that out when it doesn't happen a lot more.
Thank you for that. So just as we go into the last 3 minutes, so I'm going to condense both two questions into one then. So how optimistic are you that the skills gap is going to be bridged in Wales? And secondly, what would be your hope for, what would be your main advice for it to happen? So I'll just go to Kanishka for that one.
Thanks, Claire. It's a classic political thing to say that I'm deeply optimistic for the future, but I am deeply optimistic for Wales. And the reason for that is, I guess, twofold. One, I feel that when it comes in particular to digital and artificial intelligence futures, the possibilities for what those things can do for education specifically as well is just so material. And as a result, I think we can catch up on the gap if we're able to deploy those technologies, but also bring people along in a way that starts with where they are in a much, much quicker way than we could for previous leaps and changes in technology. So I think that's the first thing. And then to your second question of, hey, how do we make some of this happen? I think one of the main lessons that I take away for the Vale of Glamorgan and for Wales is to think of digital not as a distant, separate thing altogether, but to fundamentally say, where are we starting from as a set of sectors? So we have a real set of strengths in creative sector. We have a great green and renewables context as a result of the natural landscape in Wales. And we have a pretty fast-growing cyber and fintech sector in parts of South Wales as well. Let's really hone in on where we can make sure we can deepen our existing strengths and draw out who is able to take part in those subsectors, rather than think of digital and AI as some sort of external shock to the system that we have to try and somehow move to try and adapt to. I think we have everything we need in terms of capital, ideas, talent, people, institutions to be able to make the most of it. But the key is to marry where we're going and where we are starting from.
Tom?
I'll be very quick as well. The delights of going second. I absolutely echo kind of Kanishka's comments. Then I'm not a politician, but I am also very positive about what the opportunity for Wales. I think we will get there. It's definitely there's lots of work still to be done, but I think it is around the points we've raised around the collaboration between education and academia, government and industry. So how do you bring together that kind of coalition of the willing? This is around sort of interdisciplinarity, sort of boundary spanning. So how do you kind of work across traditional, inflexible sort of systems and structures and be a bit more agile and innovative? And I think it's that pitch. So what's the pitch? What's the opportunity for Wales as a digital policy or a digital education test bed? So we can say, like, we're good at doing this kind of stuff, and we can spin stuff up at pace and at scale. So to say, like, we're a place to try out new things and like leveraging all of that infrastructure and opportunity for sure.
Thank you both very much. Thank you both, Tom and Kanishka. It's been fantastic. And thank you all for attending. Thank you so much.